All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to GSERA's May membership meeting, exploring coding. And we've got a great faculty student panel to help explore some of these issues. Dr. Andy Anderson, our facilitator, Dr. Wendy Crocker, Dr. Michele Campbell, who worked with Dr. Crocker and has recently been hooded. So all congratulations. This is the kind of inspiration end of the line for all of the rest of us who are still very much in the messy middle of our doctoral journeys. And then I have some information about coding kind of technologies and tools. And so I'll also be participating a little bit at the end of this session. And so just as a reminder, this session is being hosted by GSERA, the Graduate Student Education Research Association. And we are a student-led organization. We are a volunteer-led organization, and we really strive to bring educational materials like this program to all of the graduate students at GSE, but also to really build opportunities for folks to collaborate and to network and to build community. Speaking for myself, I would not be in this program were it not as, kind of primarily online and the flexibility that that affords me. But it can be lonely. And so GSERA is a channel to find your people and to find that peer support and those thought partners who can really help your work be better and can help your experience be better. And so one of our core programs is the mentor program. These slides are available for folks to view themselves. And so Jen or Tay may already have dropped the link in the chat. If not, they can do so at any point. And so then the slide deck links out also to a home-based doc where a lot of these resources are linked, and also some extra GSERA resources are linked to that home-based doc, including this mentor program. So if you're interested in learning more or applying to either receive mentoring or become a mentor, both of those options are available to you. And we've got kind of all of our board here. And since we've got so much great content, I'll just kind of invite everyone to come on camera and wave. Again, I'm the president. I promise I'll shut up soon. Jen Miller is our vice president. Taylor Cello is our secretary. Melody Sue is our treasurer. And Chris Vo is our program director. So if you get involved in the mentoring program, Chris really helps captain that beautifully. So our goals for this particular session are to explore some core principles around coding, especially with qualitative data, because it can feel so much scarier or messier when you're working with qualitative data. I expect we're also going to do a little bit of myth busting as part of that. Provide some examples of the options available so you can find the most successful coding strategy for your project and the way you work. And then, as I said, preview some tools and resources that might be of interest to you if you want to leverage technology in different ways. And then hopefully have a nice, healthy, 20, 25 minutes for questions and answers. And with that, here again is our panel, and Dr. Anderson, I will hand it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sherri, for that introduction and grounding us a little bit of who we are as GSERA. Board, fantastic. You guys are doing an amazing job, and your headshots are next level. Very, very impressive there. And before I dive in and lean in on Dr. Crocker to share some of her expertise, I think for me this topic is really exciting. I loved coding as a doctoral student. I love coding as an action researcher, and I was literally doing it today with one of my instructional leadership teams. I love kind of diving in and manipulating it and getting your hands on it. And I really think the coding really sets you apart from a student to a student researcher to a doctoral student, and also future doctors. So I'm really excited. I feel like this space, you guys are the right people to say I'm excited about. I can't go home and say, you know what, I'm really excited about coding. kids because they won't really know what I'm talking about. So I'm excited for this conversation. This is great. All right, so we have Dr. Crocker here today. We have Dr. Campbell, recent Dr. Campbell, and we have Sherri. And I think it's just an awesome opportunity because not only we have Dr. Crocker, Dr. Campbell from a student perspective and professor perspective, but they work together. So I'm really excited to unpack that as well and lean in and talk about that. So to begin, I'd love to pass it over to Dr. Crocker, and if you wanted to share with us a little bit of your thoughts about coding, initial thoughts, maybe principles of coding, and lending some of your expertise, that'd be great.
Thank you, Andy. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here. And yes, to talk about coding. And I totally understand geeking out about coding. I do recall as a doctoral student thinking, oh my gosh, it felt like this monolith. In my head, there were two, well, among others, but there were two giant monoliths on the journey. IRB that took up this big, all the myths and fantasies around IRB. And oh my gosh, you can submit documents and never be found again. And coding was kind of the same thing, right? It was like, it's just this kind of big monolith. And everybody says, oh, are you doing your coding yet? And it felt as if it needed to be in all caps. And once I overcame that, all right, am I doing this right? What am I supposed? But mine doesn't look like. Is this okay? And I think we can feel those echoes and those iterations of self-doubt and needing it to look right or needing it to be right, whatever right means, because we've been in courses where we've handed work in and then we get feedback back that it, here it was according to the template, or here it was according to the rubric, and you kind of need to develop here, but not, there isn't a net like that around coding, because it really is your step into what it means to do qualitative research. So this is really the trust yourself. This really is the make time. This really is what is your system. This really is follow the data. And I want to unpack what exactly that means, because I'm sure every chair says it. And then a guiding principle that I like to adhere to with the advisees with whom I have the honor and privilege of working is the necessity to be able to write what you do. So let's start at the beginning. You've got to make time and take your time. So you immerse yourself in your data. And I know it's like, well, what does that mean? I've only got an hour. No, this is about immerse yourself in your data. And I recall back in the day, burning my interview data onto CDs and playing them in the car on my drive to work. And that's so that I wasn't doing anything else except listening to my participants. I wasn't reading anything. I wasn't trying to pull over to the side of the road and highlight. I was just listening and listening and listening and listening, so that when I went to the transcript and compared that audio, what I had been listening to what I was now actually reading, the words kind of came off the page for me. I was able to really identify patterns more easily. And it wasn't a case of, I've got 60 minutes, I'm going to code. It was, how can I utilize my time so that I can really step into this data with my participants and listen carefully about what they are saying. So it was making time and then taking my time so that I wasn't trying to rush this process. It's not like, oh my gosh, I have a paper due tomorrow, I had better get on it. Yeah, if the coding is due tomorrow to your chair, you should have been on it 2 weeks ago, okay? And if not, you need to reach out to your chair and say, you know what? Can we meet tomorrow? And can I just share my screen and show you some data because I'm really stuck. And don't forget, you can do that with your chair because they're the PI on the project. So you really can talk together about the same data set. You're not alone, all right? And your chair has expertise in how they coded data. So make the time and take your time, because this is not an exercise in counting how many times I saw a certain word or how many times my participants described a similar thing. And this isn't necessarily me looking for the things that are going to confirm my opinion going into the research. And that is very hard to do. So that leads me into the second principle, that was create a system that works for you. So whether that was computer assisted coding using in vivo or MaxQDA or some other program that works for you, if you're somebody that's comfortable doing that, take the time to really learn the program more than just creating these beautiful images, word clouds, and graphs, because otherwise, at its very surface level, it's a counting program. I could use an abacus and do that, all right? So if you're not using the program to go deeper, then really think about the ways in which you're using those programs and whether or not it would be to your benefit to maybe do some computer assisted and maybe do some manually. Ironically, manual coding doesn't take as long as you think it's going to, because you develop the system that works for you. Mine was listening, going to the transcripts first with a pencil and then circling areas or putting arrows on them. Secondly, going with a pen and seeing whether or not the same things came up to me. And then thirdly, using a highlighter. And then moving into spreadsheets and taking all of those highlighted pieces and creating a system on spreadsheets that worked for me. But that might not be for you. You might literally be chart paper, sticky notes, and highlighters. And that's fine, as long as you can articulate what you did with the data. Follow the data, like follow the yellow brick road. What on earth does follow the data mean? Follow the data really means do not go into your coding with a preconceived idea of what you want to have come out on the other side. And think instead of an answer to your research question, which does this, qualitative research actually does this. So you're looking for a response to your research question. So that might mean it's not the answer, but it is an answer. And that freedom, just that wording, gives you the freedom and the ability to go, okay, so if I don't have to go in and find an answer to each one of my sub-questions or my cycle 1 questions, and instead find those patterns and cluster those ideas, it's much more freeing than having to come to a definitive piece. It also gives you a lot more latitude when you're thinking about constructing your action step, because it gives you a lot more places that you can go. I hearken it to making caramel popcorn, right? Up here in Canada in the winter, you gotta do the popcorn thing. So, you put the popcorn in and you put the caramel in, and at first it just kind of looks like a gooey mess, and it's all one big chunk of delicious goo. That's what your data is going to be like too, delicious goo, until you do one big stir and suddenly the pieces start clumping together. And now it's not just one big pot, it's several clumps of delicious goo. And then you do it again, and it just clumps into these different clusters of the way in which you're trying to make sense of that. So instead of saying, I want one big ball of popcorn, instead we have 6 or 7 different clusters or sticky balls of goo. And that is just a little bit more freeing about letting the data lead you instead of saying, I want to find this, I want to find this, I want to find this, I want to find that. I'm going to write down these 4 things and find data that connects to each of those things. That is a coding method, but it's not emergent coding. And in action research, we talk about emergent coding. If you put up particular criteria to which you are responding, that is called a priori coding, meaning that you have already figured out what you're looking for. And it's a legitimate kind of coding. It's a legitimate kind of coding in qualitative data. You just have to make sure that you call it what it is. If you've gone in looking for assessment techniques, and that's what you pulled out of your data, and you link those things together, you can't say that's emergent, because that isn't emergent. You looked for that particularly. So that's a priori versus emergent. So following the data is emergent. And finally, be able to write down what you do. Don't just be that 2 sentences in the dissertation that says, I used 2 rounds of coding. The first was in vivo and the second was descriptive. More can be found in Appendix A. That, as a reader, tells me nothing about what you did in terms of your analysis. So work with your chair. You write it out, right? I burned this onto CDs. I listened to them extensively. I then went back and matched the transcripts and write your process down. And in conversation with your chair, figure out where's the place for this. Is it in Appendix A? Is it in a condensed version in section 2? Is it in a diagram or some kind of a flow through? Is it something I'm going to talk about in my defense? But you need to be able to talk about what you did with your data, because that's the analysis. That's the magic. And we want to know, how did you make the magic happen in your work so that you can confidently, here comes that trustworthiness element, right? So you can confidently talk to us about what you found in relation to your question, and we believe you. That's the trustworthiness piece. How's that for 4 principles? Make time, take your time, create a system, follow the data, and write down what you do. And I know that Dr. Campbell is going to be able to elaborate on a lot of those pieces as she talks about what she did in her own process, which was brilliant, by the way.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Crocker. I really love those 4 principles, and you really provided some really key sound bites that I think is, I mean, hopefully is, I mean, they're resonating with me. So I'll just use an I statement. So I really appreciate that. Before I do bounce it to Dr. Campbell, one of the things that I have a right there question. I know we're going to get to Q&A in just a little bit, but the thought that I had was I thought it was really interesting that you spent time listening to your data beforehand. I love that idea of burning the CDs. I remember burning CDs as well. But that really kind of gave me the impression of, like, not only you're listening to the data, but you're really starting to own that data, right? And from owning that data, I'm sure that gave you that initial start to start to, as you said, that's a great analogy of that popcorn, start turning that popcorn. Would that be advice would you give people of if they're not quite sure where to start or where to dive in, is spend time? Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think no surprise, Dr. Anderson, you've hit it right on the head. I don't pick up a pencil, even now when I'm doing my own research to publish. I don't pick up a pencil in my coding until I've gone through and listened to or reread all of the transcript, rewatched all the videos, listened to the recordings. I listen. I read. And what starts to happen is wait, just a second, stop. I think I think I had Andy say that in his interview too. Just a second, let me write that down where that was, right? And just a little note that I found out the hard way. When you're using audio and video data, make sure you do a counter so that you can just go, okay, at minute 15 and 10 seconds, Andy said XYZ. And I know Michele said something similar. So now I've got the, oh my gosh, I have two people that are kind of talking about the same thing. I wonder if there's anybody else that kind of talks about it, maybe not in those words, but it's connected, right? Remember the Saldana book? You read that and you go, oh my gosh, my brain is so full. What's the difference between in vivo, concept, descriptive, blah, blah, blah? Yeah, okay, you've got that as your backdrop, but now when you're actually doing it, it starts to make more sense. Descriptive coding is when people use other words to talk about the same idea. In vivo is when people actually use the same terms and make connections between those concepts. So yeah, listen, read. That's a good step into it.
Yeah. That's awesome. And the other subtlety that I'm really picking up on is really capturing your researcher work, your researcher moves, right? And in capturing and writing down as that's a great principle, and it's a really great reminder, because everything has a space in place in the dissertation and living in the RDA and capturing that process, and then not only and also grounding your process in like the Saldana book, right? Grounding your researcher moves. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Crocker, for sharing your perspective of the professor as well as your expertise. That's awesome. I'd love to shift now to Dr. Campbell, recent Dr. Campbell, which is great. Congratulations. And if you want to pick up the baton where Wendy left off and hear from your perspective, someone who just lived this not too long ago.
Sure. Yeah, coding. Okay. So I think we had a lot of conversations, in our weekly sessions with our fellow students. And, one of the things that came up more than once, and also in conversations with other students, is like Wendy said, am I doing this right? Like, am I doing this correctly? Is this the right way to do this? Is there a checklist that shows me how to do this? And so the thing I wanted to start off with first is there is no right way or wrong way to code. And so just to kind of really hit that home, I wish I knew that even as early as cycle 0, because it would have set me up, it kind of would have set my brain up for, what was to come. Apply what you already know. How do you, think about yourself? How do you process large tasks right now at your job, or, if you're, doing something in your house, or, what is your method for attacking those things? And how do you like to solve problems? Because those things that you already do, those approaches are valuable and can be applied to the coding process. I'll go back and, talk a little more about each of these. Chip away every day. Wendy knows this one. I really believe in the power of a personal motto. Like, I needed something to keep me going. Some people pictured the little engine that could. Some people, for me and my accountability buddy, Janine, I'll give her a shout out. She was my buddy through this program. We would text each other, chip away every day, and kind of give each other updates. You can't cram for coding. Wendy addressed this with time. You need time, you need practice, and you also want to revisit older work. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then find joy in the process. I never would have said that, yay, I can't wait to code. Like, I was like a lot of people, I had anxiety about it. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had all of this information, and my cycle 1 process lasted approximately 8 months. I had a challenging time finding participants.
Hello.
And so I had to, it was a long process that required me to go back and revisit.
Okay, I was like, I can't get in. Hope you're still there.
Sorry. so I had to go back and, you know, revisit those earlier interviews and listen to them and listen to them again, as Wendy said. And so I think finding joy in the process is really important because a lot of us are, you know, this some of the things that we hear from participants, is tough to listen to, right? I mean, my work, you know, I heard racism, I heard sexism, I heard things like that, and it can be heavy at times, and so finding joy in the process is really important. And I found joy in the process because even though some of the things I heard, you know, were, you know, I felt emotion for participants at times. I felt like the work would lead to positive change and progress. And so that's where I found joy in the coding, really using their words, really connecting with those voices in the coding process. And then you know, as Wendy said, all of a sudden you make connections, you discover things. Wait a minute, interview 2 said something like that. What's happening here? And then you go, oh, you know, the third person I interviewed talked about it in a different way, but wow, I'm seeing things kind of happen. So, so those are kind of that's the quick rundown of what I wanted to share. I think when you know, if we go back to no right or wrong way to code and then applying what you already know. So an example for me is I have a design background. I started my career as a graphic designer, moved into communications and marketing, but for graphic design, so I'm a visual person, right? So for me, coding became very visual. I used color coding. I took more than 1,000 codes and narrowed that down to 8 categories. And I color coded all my codes, and then that allowed me to visually see when I decided what the categories would be. Wow, all the yellow stuff is leadership related, right? And I could look at it and go, wow, look at all this stuff. And then I could reorganize it on a second Excel tab in a way that could lead me to themes. So, so for me, being visual with it was helpful. That may not be helpful for somebody else. And then just, you know, so think about how you work. Think about your skills and the way you approach things, and that could really help you through the coding process. I think, you know, like the chip away every day, no joke. 4.5 years later, I had the pleasure of attending the ceremony and graduating, and it was amazing. But this takes time. Coding, especially, coding is so important because this is what creates your action step, right? So cycle 1, take the time, really listen to those voices, figure out what, you know, the action step. For me, it was so gratifying to know that I could I called them meaningful strings, that I could tie things together and come up with that action step and really feel good about that action step, knowing that it was really inspired by participant voices. And that was all done through the coding process. And so it's important to, even if it's a little bit every day, you know, listen to those interviews. And then, you know, the same, you can't cram for coding. Give yourself time, practice patience, revisit older work. So I did mostly a manual process. And so, however, I did use digital tools. So I started in Otter AI. I listened to things. I would highlight, you know, quickly things that I thought stood out for interesting reasons. Always with the research question in mind. Like, does this relate to the overarching research question? And if so, I just kind of highlighted things as I went. And then moved that into Word, where I came up with a method that made sense to me, where I had the transcript on the left and I left room on the right. And then I went through the transcripts again and started bolding things, more things that came out, and started putting codes on the right side that aligned with the voices. And then all of that went into Excel. So I had a very kind of and I think doing that for me really gave me time to spend with the data. And then I referred to this process as which was on the slide there, a Zen garden, because I needed to find a way to be patient with the process and to, like I said, find joy. And so for me, I just pictured all of this as like a big Zen garden, and I would just comb through it, and I would look at the codes, the little pebbles, right? And I would look at each one and go, this goes here, that goes there. And then it just started to come alive. And so I think that was just having those images in your mind. If some of you are into sports, like this truly is a marathon, it is not a sprint or even a 5K. You've got to take your time. You've got to give your participants the time they deserve. That's really something that I didn't want to rush it. I really spent time on this. And then you get better at coding as you go, right? So by the time I got to interview 10, 11, 12, I was like, ooh, I think I'm better at this now. I think I'm really starting to get this. And so I went back to interviews 1 through 9 and kind of made sure that my thought process, and I missed things, right? Because like the first 2 interviews, the first 3 interviews, I was kind of like, what am I doing? So, and that's okay. You have time, and give yourself time to go back and really spend time with those voices. So yeah, and that's really where the joy came from. I met some amazing women during my research, and listening to their voices and giving them, just a venue to express their experiences is where I found joy in that process. And seeing the voices in the code and moving into that process, getting to cycle 2 was fascinating. And then the last thing I would say for me, for what I did in cycle 1, and again, it was just this sort of organic process that I just kept playing with. And then I finally got to where I was like, oh, I like how this is working. I'm going to go with this. It worked really well for me. And so I was able to use the same process for cycle 2. That may not be true for everyone, but for me, it worked out very well. And so I could easily, and when I had the same process for cycle 2, I could really see the connections between the participants in each cycle. So yeah, and again, it's just like solving a big puzzle. I mean, Wendy talked about popcorn. I'm going to talk about like a big puzzle. Like it's just it's a great process, and if you look at it and you find joy, you will get it done, and you will be amazed at what comes out on the other side. It's unbelievable. So yeah, so I think that's what I wanted to share, and happy to talk about anything else.
Wow. Dr. Campbell, what a gift. Love, there's so many great analogies there. I love analogies, but I'm awful at them. So that was well done. And when Dr. Crocker made a comment, I wrote the same thing down on, similar as Dr. Crocker wrote in the chat, is their trust empowers our work. They're trusting us to voice their ideas and reactions, concerns, and passions. And I wrote honoring the voices of your participants. And I think that's such a powerful, and not to lose sight of that. I'm so glad that you surfaced that. Dr. Crocker, do you want to add anything from your perspective of being her chair through this process, and maybe that relationship, or maybe extend anything that Michele had to offer?
Sure, absolutely. It'd be a pleasure to talk about Michele and her work. She's been incredibly honest and very vulnerable with everybody about the time that she took, both intentionally and unintentionally, but actually used that stumbling rock to her advantage. So having to stretch out her time in the program, she didn't just kind of check out. Although we couldn't directly be working together, she signaled to me that she wasn't going to be able to be in direct contact. What are the kinds of things I could be working on when you and I aren't able to be meeting together? So that she was very intentional with how she used her time and her process. She also was not afraid to reach out. I mean, we had a weekly standing meeting. She was not afraid to send me email ahead of that or after that or in between meetings with participants. And I have to say, being the coding geek that I am, I saved them all. And I said, think about this. You are sending me analytic memos. So when it comes to writing your dissertation, if you're talking to me about something or you're saying, here are the themes that I've come up with, I have the ability to say, remember on such a date, when you sent this to me by email, I want to see that quote in your dissertation. Because now she had the ability to actually triangulate that as data. So her field notes actually became data. Her analytic memos became data, which was a really cool thing that developed just in our chair advisee relationship. But it really, because again, Michele just did an exquisite job in her manuscript. She was able to leverage that as almost another data point to confirm that this is what her participants were saying. Michele, it's no surprise that she's a communications person because one of her superpowers is communication. She would connect with others in our cohort. She would connect with me. She would connect with other folks. She would cold call participants. So this is someone that really went after data, and she also went to publicly available documents. So she put it in IRB, but she went after publicly available documents to be able to triangulate what participants had said. So just because it's in your action step, don't discount the power of document analysis, and don't discount the power of analytic memos and field notes as sources of data. Because I was just in the process of finding Michele's DOI for her dissertation, and I'm going to put it in the chat so that you can have a look at the way in which she talks about data and how she does that in her action step as well as in her section 2.
That's awesome. Thank you, Wendy, for that. In just a second, I'm going to shift to Sherri for a few moments, and then we're going to open up for more of Q&A for everyone. But the one thing that, Michele, I was really impressed hearing, and it's a subtlety, but you really never lost sight of why you were doing what you were doing, right? You were seeing the forest from the trees or trees from the forest. And one thing I really liked is that you said that the coding, right? You were coding to create themes, right? And those themes were used to help with your action steps. Like, so it's so important as we're all going through this, whether we're students or just action researchers and researchers in general, is never to lose sight why we're doing what you're doing. And I felt like you articulate that really well. So thank you so much. I'm going to just shift a little bit to Sherri just for a few moments, and then we're going to open up for some Q&A. And Sherri has some insights and thoughts about technology.
Yes. Before I share my slide in the deck, one of the things I really want to reemphasize, because I think a lot of us, and we've heard it from our GSERA membership, sort of looking for like, what's that one magic tool that's gonna like fix, make it all better for me, or give me that clear path that doing it the right way, and we already have heard from 2 exceptional scholar practitioners who use manual coding processes. And so, to reiterate, there is absolutely no reason not to use a manual process if that is what works for you and your data and your project. However, I am a little bit more of a tech head, and also because of my postdoctoral career goals, it is actually beneficial for me to be certified in using NVivo and to show that I have that proficiency. And so that's one of the things that I invested as part of my own professional development, but it was definitely driven by both its usefulness for coding and these other goals. And so it does come back to finding what's right for you, which brings me to like use the right tool for the job. And as I was preparing this presentation and this slide and putting links in the home base doc, I really was focused on those software packages that help you explicitly do the coding. And Vivo is the one we talk about a lot because, one, it has a huge market share, and also because it is the one that Northeastern University gives us free access to. And so, we have links to where you can download that, something to know about how that works is the university has a subscription. So if you were to download the software, you get a access authorization code that allows you to use the software. And those authorization codes customarily expire around the end of the calendar year. So if your work crosses from December 31st of one year to January 1st of the other, you are going to have to come back to the software downloads page, find out what the new year's access code is, enter that, or you will be locked out of the software. I promise you, having just gone through this in my own transition from December 31st, 2024 to January 1st, 2025, all my data was still there. But I did have to kind of go through that extra step in order to be able to get back into the software and get back at my stuff. And I've highlighted a few different YouTube playlists and, a website of a fellow whose tutorials I found particularly helpful. But then also, again, because it was valuable to make the kind of investment in more robust professional development, I also did a 2-day training with Ben Meehan, who is somebody that Matt Ezzo recommended to us. And, I have linked to his company's YouTube channel, which already has some wonderfully useful videos like how you can use coding software to help with your lit review when you're revising it after R4 and during your dissertation status, to like really check, okay, how many articles do talk about XYZ in my literature group. I also, a couple other common platforms that people use are Deduce and MaxQDA. MaxQDA is very popular. I also think it's fairly expensive. I know at my small nonprofit, it was out of our reach financially. But one of the things that came very clear in the training with Ben, and that comes out very clearly in Dr. Adu's resources, is the importance of your research methods and your research question. It's always coming back to those sound research methods. And for me, I find using a mixed tech approach has been super helpful, where I do the active coding in the software, but I also as my version, and it will definitely evolve as I really get out of coursework and into my DIP work. But as my current commitment to sort of daily connection to my research and my topic and my questions, one of the books I was reading said, write a little something in your research journal every day about like what you're doing, what you're thinking. And so like that's my low tech way of also helping me assimilate and immerse myself in my project and my data, and mixing the low tech of whatever benefit physically writing has for my brain, because oh my gosh, it has so much benefit for my brain, not for everybody's, but for mine, with the high tech has been super helpful. Something else that I'm just going to bring up quickly before I stop talking, and I'll stop sharing because obviously these were not linked to the slide. But this is prompt actually by Randell's question about Otter AI, because I'm guessing, but Dr. Campbell, tell me, just definitely jump in shortly if I'm wrong. But I know some folks, and so I'm guessing Dr. Campbell might have used Otter AI to help do a first version of a transcript from recording files. I'm using the software, the AI website TurboScribe for exactly that same purpose, and I personally love TurboScribe because the audio file, is right there. It gives me all of the timestamps that I like, and also it's very easy when I'm editing in the middle of a transcript where if I click on a passage that I'm like, I don't think that's really what was said there. As soon as I click on that bit of the text in the environment, it starts playing me that audio clip for me to like double check what happened. Um, and so like that's another technology tool that a number of us I think have found to be super helpful, because when I started way back in January 2022, really the only option I had was the word recognition of in within the Microsoft Word platform, and oh my God, that was awful. So using these tools, the tools have evolved, and so there's a lot that's beneficial, but there's still, the core principle is use the right tools for your project and for your way of working, not just because it's the newest software package.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Sherri, for sharing that perspective and bringing that tech perspective in, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So I can't believe how fast this has gone, and we have 10 minutes or so right here for Q&A. And I know looks like we had one question, and thank you, Sherri. I think you addressed it about the Otter AI piece, and I'm not sure if Randall, if you have another follow-up question with that, or if anyone else has a question, that'd be awesome. So you can either put it in the chat, or you can, yeah, please, Michele. Thank you.
I was just going to say I can add to that with Otter AI. So yes, Sherri, what mostly, that is, I ran my audio files through there, and that was my way to listen to interviews and basically fix incorrect words, make sure things were clean. But in terms of like specific to coding, I'm gonna pull out Stringer 2014 here when I say, it was part of my, what he refers to as look phase, right? So in Otter AI, as I was listening, there's a highlighter pen in Otter AI, and that's where I started that process of the look phase and the sort of units of meaning, right? That Stringer talks about, where I just instinctively, very quickly was like, that sounds interesting, highlight. That sounds interesting, highlight. And again, I didn't know what I was looking for at the time, right? But that was my first pass at like, wow, that's a really powerful quote, highlight that. And then when I transferred the transcripts into Word, the highlight came with it. And then I went through and continued that process where I saw more things with a quick pass and bolded things, and sort of that was the start of my coding process. Because I did use in vivo, I wanted to use mostly quotes. I used a little bit of process coding as well, but I was highlighting the words of the participants, and it started in Otter AI, if that's helpful.
Awesome. Great, thank you. Dr. Crocker, you have a hand up. Would you like to add something or ask a question?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Not to embarrass Dr. Campbell, but if I may share the screen, Sherri, I've called up a piece out of her section, out of her Appendix A, that I think would be helpful to this discussion, if I'm able to do that.
Yes, I've ensured the permissions should be that you're allowed to share at this point.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah. All right. So when we're talking about be able to write your process, right? And Dr. Anderson reiterated the fact that it all counts, right? There are places in your dissertation and practice for all of these things. So this is part of Dr. Campbell's Appendix A that relates directly to her section 2. So those two things should be like partners in a dance. right? It shouldn't just be there's these big glaring errors out of section 2 where you've said, oh, by the way, go to appendix A, because I'll tell you, your third reader will hate that. So they have to dance together. And if you look here, you can see audio file was uploaded to Otter AI, transcribed, listened to several times while fixing inaccurate words and speaker. Excerpts that seemed relevant to the action step objectives were highlighted. Da 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 da. Goes in. Sorry, I'm just scrolling up. See, I'm giving you a snapshot so you'll go and look up this elegant, amazing manuscript, right? Codes, cycle 2 codes were not predetermined, resembled a priori because I was looking for solutions that related. So here as a reader, I can tell she knows the difference between emergent coding and a priori coding, then going from codes. So I'm looking at all of this, and although there is one reference to Miles and Saldana, isn't this the practical application of what you read in R3 from Miles and Saldana? This is what it looks like, right? And Tay, thanks for shouting out about her her one figure, because it's gorgeous, right? So thanks, Sherri. I'll just stop there. But it's the idea that coding isn't just this one sentence that you put in section 2 that you read in so many dissertations. It's what did you do with your data, and can you talk about it? Because if you don't write about it, your committee is going to ask you about it at your defense. So head them off. Give them one less thing to ask about. Write it down.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Wendy. We have a question in the chat. So Felipe, I'm in questions. I'm in R2, cycle 0 now. Is it worthwhile to learn in vivo now to code or code manually? I won't be in R3 until winter 26, R3.5, fall 26. Is a big learning curve. Will I forget it by then? I'm not sure if anyone, Dr. Campbell, Dr. Crocker, if you wanted to do that. Or
I mean, the one thing I can say is I admitted this yesterday when I spoke with some of you, that for me, one of the reasons I went manual coding is, number one, my brain works that way. Number two, with work and school and all of the new technology I was already learning on a variety of levels, I chose not to learn a new technology for coding. I wanted to kind of figure out my own way. So I can't speak to that, but I will say, as someone who has to use new software a lot for a lot of reasons, I would say it's never too early to start learning something, because when you get to cycle 1, you don't want to have the added stress of learning a new technology while you're trying to listen to your participant voices and you're trying to sift through 12 interviews and all. It can add stress to that process. And I really want everyone to find the joy in coding. And so I don't think you want to start learning a new software the day that you need to start listening to your first interview. So that would be my recommendation, but I did not use that, so I can't speak to it more than that, but that's just kind of my personal experience. So,
I mean, just as a slightly different trajectory, I also used manual coding for my cycle 0. I was, newly back to school after a really long time away. So it didn't make sense for me at the time. I had enough of a learning curve, but I did. I had expected to take R3 last fall, in the fall of 2025. Then some family issues emerged, and I had to sort of take that term off. But I was still a university student, and I still had privileges. And so, that's when I started working within Vivo and found those YouTube playlists and started digging into these resources. And then that gave me a foundation. So then when I got to cycle 1, I was at least somewhat oriented. And then, I do wish, I didn't learn about Ben Meehan until kind of halfway through last quarter. And so by the time I was able to sign up for a workshop, it was kind of the last 2 days of the winter quarter. And I'm like, oh, damn, I would have done it so much better if I'd had that training before. But but now I can do my cycle 2 with all of that growth in knowledge.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for those responses. Following on the chat, I'm not sure if I see a question here. Does anyone in the group want to raise their hand for a question for Dr. Crocker, Dr. Campbell, Sherri, or myself? Painful wait time.
They just did such a good job.
That's it. Yeah, that's awesome.
I have
Yes,
a question.
please. Thank you.
So we're Randall and I are in R2 together, and I am just right now like a little bit overwhelmed with the interview. Actually, I understand a little bit more because we've had more practice with that. But the document and the observation, so I don't know if you have any tips for coding. I went down the wrong rabbit hole. I need that research question so I don't get very distracted because there's a lot of information in these items. But I don't know if you have any tips for coding, like multiple sources, because I have 3 different things right now that need coded. I don't know if you like recommend doing the interview first or the document first, or if you have any tips.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, and then if anyone would like to dive in, and I really, kind of want to start by just referencing Dr. Campbell's, point that resonated with me is just not really losing sight of why we're doing what we're doing, right? Kind of, and I liked what you said of keeping the research question front and center. Super important, really huge. And thinking about when you are, that whole idea of triangulating data, those 3 pieces, it's really how does one data set help inform the next data set? Like, I think that's just an important piece of why you're looking at multiple data sets. And I think, with the documents and with the observations, and I think going at it with the same critical eye is really, really important, right? So once you take as in qualitative research, details are our friends. So the more details you can have and the more that you can write and the more that you can capture, let's just take observations first. Like if you can really write those thorough notes, and really that becomes your transcript, right? So then kind of going through that same process, reading and rereading, and start to think about how to manipulate, that data set, and then go back to the interview, right? Revisit are those. I love Dr. Crocker's popcorn. Is it congealing together? And then go to the document review, same thing, like a really, really critical eye, and start going through that process. And the more it churns, the more it comes together, you're going to start to see those buckets really, really form. I mean, that would be my advice is how does one data set inform the other data set, right? And then start to think about how they're starting to really come together, but having that critical eye. I'm not sure if anyone wants to add.
Yeah, I mean, I can add to that because that's what I did in cycle 2. So
Awesome.
Cycle 2, I spoke with board members of arts and culture organizations, and I did my cycle 2 during the summer, and boy, is it hard to get volunteers during the summer. Just a side note there. So I had 7 volunteers for these Think Big sessions that I had, and it was great information. They were fantastic. It was really informative, but I felt like I needed more. And so I decided to add document review. And so what I did was I chose documents inspired by cycle 2 participant voices. So the things they were saying, the suggestions they made, I wanted to dive a little deeper into. So I started searching for documents that, that tied to their thoughts and ideas. And so that, directly informed, and I wrote about that as well in the dissertation, how their voices, I had a chart as well in there that showed like what inspired this document choice. What did the participants say? And it was like, succession planning conversation or whatever. And so that that is, so I did that participant coding first, and then leveraged that to choose documents, and then did document review. And then I could see sort of how things were tying together, and also tying back to cycle 1, which was really exciting. So, so I don't know if that's helpful, but.
And I think just like the third layer I'll add on top of that, just because for my cycle 0, I ended up writing this entire section of my cycle 0 field report about these orphan codes that emerged when I started getting obsessed with some like really cool shit that was coming up that had nothing to do with my research question. And so like I owned it. I learned from that, and so like that was when I kind of, learned to keep a better discipline about like what is my research question, and so like now if things like that are coming up, I might park an analytic memo about it and say, ooh, this is an interesting thread that isn't about my dissertation, but maybe it's my first post dissertation article, and then just like leave it there in the library. So like there are ways to kind of do that. But like certainly the idea of keeping the focus, and then the document analysis, one of the other things I will say is there's, depending on what your questions are, there are lots of interesting ways to use tools for that, because I'm working on the Universal Design for Learning framework. One of my questions is how to actually teach UDL to teachers in a more UDL way. And so my document analysis was on the UDL guidelines website, which in a lot of ways is a glaring example of do as we say, not as we do. And so like I ran that sucker through Hemingway to like show how highfalutin and like grade 20 plus the language was. I kind of analyzed the quantity of text versus other media, and so like all of those made sense with my question, and I was able to kind of leverage a lot of different lenses in that analysis.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Sherri. And I know I want to be mindful of time. It's just after 9 o'clock. Jen posted two really, really good questions. So I'll ask them both, and then depending on how much time we have, possibly we can get to both, that type of thing. So the first one is how would you suggest to work on your confidence or imposter voice? And the second question seems to be more of a technical question. How would you treat a code that continues to develop? How would you manage and track those changes? For example, if one code is about intelligence, but then it develops our multiple kinds of intelligence, such as artificial and human, academic, what tips and tricks do you? I'm not sure if Dr. Campbell, Dr. Crocker, you want to take either one of those.
I'll let Wendy take the code one. I'll talk about confidence. Even though I'm in communications for a living, it's scary to talk to people sometimes, especially in my case. I had strangers. I reached out to strangers for participants, and these were highly credentialed, impressive people. And yes, you're like, oh my gosh, they're willing to talk to me. This is crazy. So the confidence side of it, I did a lot of practice with friends throughout this program. Any paper opportunity I got to talk about women's leadership, I worked on a paper with a friend of mine that's a leader at a major medical center. I used her, I interviewed her, I practiced with her. I held Zoom sessions with friends of mine to practice things, to trial run. And that was very helpful. And then the one thing I can say is that this is also helpful in trustworthiness, building trust with your participants, is when you start with your basic background questions, almost always you're going to find something you have in common with someone you're talking with. And for me, I was in the arts and culture space, and right away, oh, I've always loved music. I play cello, and I was like, I play cello. And so we would talk about that for 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden it's like you're talking to a friend, and there's no, I don't worry about my confidence. I don't worry about what's happening. If you can make connections early with your participants during that process, it's like having a conversation with a friend in most cases. And And I was shocked by the end of these interviews how honest some of these participants were with me. And some of the things they told me were very personal. And so I think that those would be kind of my two suggestions.
That's great. Thank you. Great insight. And Dr. Crocker, do you want to take that second question about how when codes start to emerge and how they kind of branch off to subcode, sub-themes, type of thing? Yeah.
Happy to. So one of the things that I find in my own work is that what you put down initially as a theme or as a code, I guess more on the category to theme side than the code side. But what you put down initially is probably not what it's going to end up as. So you've got to, first of all, give yourself permission for that to continue to grow and morph and change. Oftentimes I can see that better if I literally draw it out and plug for Rocketbook again, find some kind of a tool, whether that's using your Apple Pen and your iPad, or whether that's using your stylus, or whether that's literally using a pencil and paper, and putting that overarching term. You've said perhaps it's intelligence, and then underneath it, you've got artificial, human, and I forget what the other one was, academic. And then put some of the codes under there, put some of the quotes under there, and then look at that and the relationship among those things. And you might find that what looks like tertiary code supporting an overarching code is actually something that you put on it, as opposed to really capturing what it is your participants said to you. So maybe it's something like making meaning. Maybe it's sense making. Maybe it's a quote. Okay. And I always encourage students to use EMIC quotes from their participants. How do you know when you're smart? Or how do we measure smart? Quote, right? Don't be afraid to do that, because again, that's that in vivo piece where you're honoring your participants' words. And some of the most powerful dissertations I've read have actually had their themes come directly from their participants. So they were able to support them from other quotes, other codes, cross-pollinating across those data sets. But ultimately, what was it that captured what this was all about? Well, Andy said it when he said da-da-da-da-da-da, and that becomes the theme, right? So hope that's helpful.
And
Awesome.
and just kind of a last piece, if you end up using some of the technology tools, there are ways to kind of leave those process notes that, I've changed this code to this, or I've created, I'm now using this as a parent code and I have 3 child codes under it. And so you could either use the technology to like create those notes for yourself and give yourself the audit trail, or coding your analytic memos. Coding can be a wonderful category for your analytic memo of just like, here's how I'm setting up my codes, and here's that rough diagram of how I think they parent and child right now, and that's how I have it set up. But talk to me in 2 months and I'll probably have flipped the diagram completely and then like rearranged the hierarchy in the software.
That's awesome. All right. I want to be mindful of everyone's time, and I think we can continue to hang on, but I want to officially thank Dr. Campbell for your time this evening. Awesome job. Thank you. Dr. Crocker, as always, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And Sherri, dual roles, not only present facilitating, but also lending your expertise, which is amazing. And I just think these events are fantastic when professors and students can come together to share their unique experience. We know that learning is very much a social, construct, and it's awesome to be able to share the space. So thank you for everyone's time, and I think we'll just officially end right now. Or actually, Sherri, do you want final words? I want to give it to you, and then we'll officially stop, and then we can continue the talk off.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple last things. I mean, certainly this is the end of the coding discussion. Thank you, Dr. Crocker. Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. even though I had my own expertise to share, there's also so much I have learned from listening and dialoguing with you tonight. So that is really wonderful. Just as a reminder, we do monthly educational events. We do power hours, which are co-working sessions, which can help you kind of build focus time and build accountability partners. And so, just kind of keep an eye on our calendar of events to see what's what. And then, again, we're thrilled to have Randell join us, and I know Randell, you were already asking in the chat about how to sort of get officially on the rolls so you can get all of our emails. Like, this is the way to do it. So Tay and I will check in with you in a few days to see that if it's gone copacetic, gone well. But anybody watching the recording, this is the QR code. Scan it off your YouTube screen and come join the party. So thank you again.